Welcome to the sixth round. I'm your host, Navid Razi, live from our studios in downtown Dallas, and I'm joined by award-winning journalist for MMAJunkie.com and USA Today, John Morgan from the fight capital of the world in Las Vegas, Nevada. And John, UFC 157 right around the corner, and what will be the first ever women's bantamweight fight in the UFC, or I guess the first ever women's fight, for that matter, in Ronda Rousey versus Liz Carmouche. And we'll get into that a little bit more next week, but it ties into a subject that I wanted to dive into, which I have a feeling I'm going to regret here in the next few weeks. But Bobby Green versus Jacob Volkman. Bobby Green on top of Jacob Volkman in half mount, dropping punches, elbows, being very active on the ground. And referee Kim Winslow steps in and stands the two guys up. It's not the most atrocious thing we've ever seen in the octagon from a referee, but Kim Winslow, I'm not sure how she's been allowed to be licensed, number one, but with being completely clueless and not having any idea what she's doing. But imagine what would have happened if she was refereeing Alistair Overeem versus Antonio Bigfoot Silva. There's no way she would have peeled Silva off Alistair Overeem the way Herb Dean did, and it would probably be the first death in the UFC.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, you're kind of looking at two different issues there. I mean, the first thing is this whole situation about a woman being in there with heavyweights. And the first time that really crossed my attention, my path, was at the Ultimate Fighter 16 finale. She was refereeing Pat Barry versus Shane Del Rosario, and it didn't end up being an issue, but it did look kind of weird in there because I had the same reaction. It was like, what if this thing goes horribly wrong? I mean, these two dudes are vicious strikers. They've got a lot on the line here. It's an emotional fight. Well, what if this thing goes wrong the way it did with Antonio Silva and Alistair Overeem, where one fighter doesn't want to stop fighting, to be honest? And how is she going to pull him off? But I want to qualify that by saying I don't think it's a sexist thing. It's not just she's a woman, she shouldn't be in there. I mean, she's not a tiny woman. She's got some strength and some size to her. I would say it's a concerning issue. I would say size appropriate, to some degree in these fights. I mean, Big John McCarthy, Dan Miragliotta, those guys need to be reffing heavyweights. Steve Mazzagati's not the biggest guy in the world. I'm not necessarily sure he could have pulled Alistair Overeem or kept Alistair Overeem safe from Antonio Silva either. So there is a little bit concerning, but the stand-up was horrible. The stand-up was terrible, and that's a second issue, and that is performance issue. How are we tracking this stuff? We seem to complain about the same people over and over, making the same mistakes. Where are we keeping record of this? Where is the score? Where is the overall evaluation of these referees, and how do they keep getting these assignments?
Yeah, and the thing with Kim Winslow, John, is the reason I brought that up is there's been several instances where it seems like she has no clue what is going on in the octagon. So it doesn't make sense to have two things that you're not capable of. You're not capable of really controlling a fight the way it should be controlled. And then at the same time, what is she going to do if Bigfoot Silva goes after Alistair Overeem like that on the ground? Or imagine if she was refereeing Paul Daly versus Josh Koscheck, and Paul Daly runs over there and tries to sucker punch Josh Koscheck, and what's she going to do in that situation? Things are going to get very ugly. I don't even care if it does sound sexist or whatever. She should not be in there, maybe with some flyweights or some bantamweights, but she should not be in there refereeing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she'd have a better chance with the welterweights. I mean, she's a little bit more size appropriate again, but I do think there is something to be considered. I'm concerned. I don't want to be considered sexist. I think you do sound sexist, Navid. I'm just telling you right now. But I don't want it to come across that way, but I think it's a legitimate concern. I mean, it's just saying, hey, could we at least maybe think about this a little bit? That's all it's saying. I don't think anybody's saying no woman should ever be in there with heavyweights, but I think it is a legitimate concern. And the second part to me is even more important. I think we have to make sure that we're tracking these mistakes. Fortunately for Bobby Green, he fought through that horrible stand-up. He continued to dominate the fight anyway. He earned his unanimous decision. But what if that had been the turning point? That would have been a far more serious concern. And just because it wasn't doesn't mean that we need to look past it and move on. I want to see where these referees, where their score is, so to speak. Who are they being evaluated by? Who's keeping track of this? Why is it not public record? This needs to all be out there, I think, so that we as fans, that fighters themselves, can be educated about who's in the cage with them and raise objections if it's necessary.
You make some very good points, John, and I'll just close with the simple this. I've heard some people comparing women refereeing with, hey, there's women in the police force, etc. The difference is they have a gun, a taser, and a baton to kind of level the playing field. This is a completely different subject, and somebody's going to get killed if something doesn't change here or hurt badly. But that's going to do it for us. This is the sixth round. Navid Razi from downtown Dallas, John Morgan from Las Vegas. We'll catch you next week.